Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a literal geopolitical earthquake. We are talking about the Islamabad Memorandum. It's this historic, yet incredibly fragile diplomatic pact forged between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran back in June 2026. The stakes here? Well, they absolutely could not be higher. We're looking at a deal designed to hit the brakes on a massive regional war and essentially save the global economy from a total depression. But as you'll see, it's already showing some major cracks under the intense pressure of proxy violence in the Middle East.
So, here is our roadmap for today. First, the historic breakthrough. Second, the road to epic fury. Third, deconstructing the deal. Fourth, the Lebanon flashpoint. Fifth, fractured domestic pressures. And finally, number 6, the ticking 60-day clock. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The historic breakthrough.
Okay, so picture this. It's June 17th and 18th, 2026, and the genuinely unthinkable happens. The US and Iran actually finalized the Islamabad Memorandum to officially end hostilities and map out a path to a nuclear settlement. The way it was signed is kind of fascinating. It was this wild mix of the digital and the physical. First, you had U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Iranian Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf executing the initial digital signatures. After that, it went to the heads of state. President Trump actually signed it during a candlelit dinner at the Palace of Versailles, hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron, while Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian signed his end right from Tehran. Just a crazy split-screen moment in history.
Moving to Section 2, Road to Epic Fury.
Now, to really grasp the concessions made in this deal, we have to rewind a bit and look at the sheer brutal violence that literally forced these bitter enemies to sit down at the table. And it really comes down to this number right here, 110. For 110 devastating days, an intense conflict absolutely raged across the Middle East. It effectively choked out the global economy and pushed both of these superpowers to the absolute brink of mutual exhaustion.
The escalation here was basically a geopolitical wildfire. It all kicked off with the 12-day war in June 2025, which gave us direct kinetic strikes between Israel, the US, and Iran. But the true point of no return? That was February 28, 2026, with the massive US-Israeli campaign known as Operation Epic Fury. In literally just 12 hours, nearly 900 strikes hammered Iran, successfully assassinating Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. But here's the thing, Iran didn't just collapse. By March 8th, his son Mujtaba Khamenei steps up as the new supreme leader and unleashes a massive wave of retaliatory ballistic missiles. Fast forward to the spring, and you've got a total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, threatening to plunge the entire planet into a depression.
But we can't just talk about the macro-level chess game here. We really have to ground this in this stark human reality. The rapid execution of Operation Epic Fury came with a horrific toll. In one instance, a U.S. cruise missile meant for a naval base catastrophically missed and hit a school in Minab, leaving 175 people dead, the vast majority of them schoolgirls. We also saw U.S. military losses, including the downing of a KC-135 aircraft over Iraq, which killed 4 crew members. It was these very specific, devastating tragedies that ultimately eroded domestic and international stomach for a long, drawn-out war.
All right, Section 3, deconstructing the deal.
So what exactly do they agree to in this thing? Well, the Islamabad Memorandum is actually a pretty brief 14-point framework, and its main goal is to set up a 60-day transition period. Basically, the U.S. agrees to drop its naval blockade, scrap all primary and secondary sanctions, and issue immediate waivers for oil exports. In return, Iran agrees to let maritime traffic pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. But, and this is a huge but, that safe passage is only guaranteed for 60 days. On the nuclear side of things, they're essentially just hitting pause. It maintains the status quo for 60 days and kicks the can down the road on those super complex technical negotiations. Crucially, though, the document explicitly demands an immediate end to military operations across all fronts, and it specifically calls out Lebanon.
Right in the absolute center of this agreement is the ultimate carrot, a $300 billion reconstruction fund. The U.S. and its regional partners are committing to pump this staggering pile of cash into Iran's economy to rebuild everything destroyed during Epic Fury. I mean, to put that into perspective, that level of funding is enough to completely rewrite regional power dynamics overnight. The catch? The actual text of the deal doesn't have any predefined, locked-in mechanisms to stop those funds from being funneled right to the IRGC or regional proxy militias. Unsurprisingly, the experts are completely split down the middle on this. In one corner, you've got folks calling it pragmatic reconciliation. They argue that the maximum pressure campaign just didn't work, and this deal formally respects Iran's political sovereignty while saving us all from a global economic collapse. President Trump backed it up, basically saying the alternative was a worldwide depression. But in the other corner, critics are blasting it as asymmetrical capitulation. Former diplomats point out that the U.S. essentially gave away all its hard-won economic leverage, unfreezing assets, allowing oil sales, just for a temporary 60-day pause, without locking down any strict, detailed limits on Iran's nuclear program or its ballistic missiles. Which brings us to Section 4, the Lebanon flashpoint. You see, the most immediate existential threat to this whole framework isn't happening in Washington or Tehran. It's happening in the Levant. This deal has one massive, fatal flaw. It dictates peace in Lebanon without actually getting the signatures of Israel or Hezbollah. And to understand why that's virtually impossible to enforce, just look at the unbelievable scale of the 2026 Lebanon war leading up to the MOU. The human toll is just staggering. We're talking nearly 4,000 Lebanese civilians killed, over 1.2 million displaced. Somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 Hezbollah militants killed. On the Israeli side, 36 IDF soldiers and 2 civilians killed, with over 1,300 soldiers wounded as Israel pushed deep into southern Lebanon to carve out a security buffer. So the reality is, you can't just sign a fancy piece of paper in Europe and expect deeply entrenched combatants to drop their weapons on a dime. Case in point, overnight on June 18th to 19th, literally as the ink was drying on the deal, the region absolutely exploded. The IDF, claiming ceasefire violations, hit over 80 Hezbollah targets, killing at least 47 Lebanese individuals. Hezbollah fired back with a massive, sophisticated ambush at al-Taher Hill, taking out 3 Merkava tanks and killing 4 IDF soldiers. This overnight chaos entirely exposed the structural impossibility of a bilateral superpower pact trying to dictate the actions of heavily armed proxies.
Moving on to Section 5, fractured domestic pressures. Over in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under intense existential political fire from his hardline coalition partners. They are demanding he maintain that southern Lebanon security buffer no matter what. After those soldiers were killed at al-Taher Hill, far-right ministers were practically screaming for unrestricted retaliation. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir literally stated that for every tear of an Israeli mother, 1,000 Lebanese mothers must weep, and that all of Lebanon must burn. The Israeli establishment sees their physical footprint in southern Lebanon as an absolutely non-negotiable security requirement, and they are flat-out refusing to play by the rules of a U.S.-Iran pact they didn't even sign. Meanwhile, over in Tehran, the spin is completely different. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has masterfully framed this entire deal as the direct result of U.S. military failure and sheer desperation. Iranian parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibafeh perfectly captured the mood of the hardliners. He was out there claiming a massive, pragmatic victory, basically saying, hey, we got several times over what we wanted through negotiation compared to what military action could ever get us. But at the exact same time, they are holding a very hard line that the Israeli presence in Lebanon is an egregious violation of the truce. And caught right in the middle of this superpower tug-of-war is the sovereign state of Lebanon itself. We're actually watching a fascinating parallel track unfold here. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, who, keep in mind, is a former army general, is taking this crisis as an opportunity to make a really bold bid for Lebanese sovereignty. In direct talks with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Aoun is officially demanding the complete disarmament of Hezbollah. And the U.S. is fully backing this play. They're hoping they can use the broader Iran deal to sever Hezbollah's financial lifelines, which would ideally empower the Lebanese armed forces to step in and dismantle the weakened militia from the inside out. Finally, Section 6, the ticking 60-day clock. Guys, the window we have to actually solidify this peace is incredibly fragile. That violent flare-up in Lebanon instantly threw a wrench into the MOU's implementation timeline. There were these highly anticipated technical negotiations scheduled for Geneva, where Vice President J.D. Vance was supposed to hammer out the stripped nuclear details with the Iranian delegation. Well, those were abruptly suspended. The fighting caused Iran to delay sending its team, and international mediators had to completely scramble. They ended up having to shift emergency crisis talks over to Cairo just to try and put out the regional fires before direct U.S.-Iran dialogue could even get off the ground. So, as we look at the next 60 days, there are really 3 critical variables that are going to determine if this whole framework survives or totally collapses. Number 1, The June 23rd to 25th Washington negotiations between Lebanon and Israel. Can the Lebanese army realistically take control of the south? Number 2, Iranian leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran actually set up a new authority that might start slapping tolls or tariffs on international shipping. If that happens, Washington will be furious, and you are going to see a massive spike in the price of gas and consumer goods at your local store almost instantly. And number 3, the actual logistics of handing over that $300 billion reconstruction fund without directly enriching the IRGC. If there's any delay there, Tehran might just turn the centrifuges right back on and resume nuclear enrichment.
Which really leaves us with the ultimate question. Will the Islamabad Memorandum actually bring lasting peace? Or is this all just a 60-day intermission before an even wider, more devastating war? The United States essentially made a massive geopolitical gamble here. They tried to decouple the stability of the global economy from the localized bloodletting happening in the Levant. But as the recent violence so clearly shows us, proxy conflicts have this violent, stubborn momentum all of their own. If the fires currently raging in Lebanon cannot be put out, those sparks are inevitably going to travel right back up the fuse to Washington and Tehran. So, what do you think? Will the deal hold? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes glued to that 60-day clock.